Marie Levesque-Caduto, Watershed Coordinator, and there are 3 partner organizations here helping out. Margot Gia is in the room. You want to just identify yourself?
Hi, this is Margot, and I'm with the Windham Regional Commission. I'm the Natural Resources Planner.
Corey?
Hi, I'm Corey Ross. I'm with the Windham County Conservation District.
And I know, Chris, you're out there somewhere.
Yep, I'm here. Chris Urich. I work for the Mount Escutney Regional Commission.
And thanks. So Corey is going to be in charge of monitoring the chat. So anyone online, if you have comments or questions, if you could use the chat, that would be very helpful. And Corey will relate any of those to me so that we can address those. If you happen to be referencing a particular slide, hopefully this will work. You'll see that there is a little slide number at the bottom of the slide. So if you have a question or comment about a particular slide, if you could use that number in the chat, it would be helpful so I can go back to the slide and know what you were trying to ask. Did I have anything else? I guess that's it. So I'll jump right in. I'll do a short presentation about what's in the plan. And then I'll open up for questions, comments, and anything else you have to offer. So quickly, there are 5 major river basins around the state and 5 basin planners. So we all do this. These plans are done for all of these different river basins on a 5-year rotating basis. And so this is, I think this is the 3rd time I do the West River plan, and we're covering the West, Williams, and Saxtons watersheds for this plan. So what tactical basin plans are is they're basically a guidebook for the Agency of Natural Resources on how to restore and protect surface waters, rivers, lakes, ponds, and streams. And we start that process by monitoring. So there's a team of scientists who go out and monitor water quality, a lot of different aspects of water quality, physical, chemical, and biological. And then we take that data and analyze it and assess it and figure out what it's telling us. And then I take that information and create the basin plan and write it up in the format that you have available to you to review. And now we are at the public input phase of that process. So I've drafted the plan and I'm looking for your input on, did I get it right? Is it covering what you feel the needs are in this basin? Did I miss anything? Are there waters that should be protected that I don't have listed? Are there waters that you're concerned about that aren't highlighted for that? I'd love to get your input and find out. And what will happen is I will then take all the comments and address them in what's called a responsiveness summary, and take those edits that are appropriate and put them in the plan and redraft it. And then that will be the final version of the plan that we will then implement over the next 5 years. So this basin covers three pretty good sized watersheds. It covers the West River, kind of basically from Weston all the way down to Brattleboro. It covers the Williams River from Andover, Chester, Rockingham. And it covers the Saxtons River, mostly kind of Windham, Grafton, that one in the middle, and Rockingham.
And Westminster.
And Westminster, thank you. So all that monitoring that's done, we base a lot of what we look at on bugs and fish. And this happens to be the macroinvertebrate or the bug community analysis. And all of these maps, anything on the green end is good and anything on the red orange end is not so good. So you can see that really the water quality in this basin is really in good shape. There's a lot of green on that map. There's a little bit in the yellow side, and there's very little on the red. So when you look at the excellent and very good to good, we're talking 88% of the basin water quality ranks in that upper scale, which is fantastic. So this watershed is in pretty good shape. We also monitor our lakes, and this little Secchi disc diagram covers nutrient trends and shoreline and lake habitat. It covers mercury pollution and invasive species. So again, the more the blue, the better, and the red, the only red on here is in Gale Meadows, which is lake in Londonderry that has Eurasian milfoil in it. And that's the only red dot. Oh, I guess there's a little one, number 35, is Weaver Pond, which is mostly privately owned. So the lakes are in really good condition, except for the fact that we do have an acid precipitation problem in this area. With southern Vermont is kind of where the Midwestern power plant discharges settle back to earth. So we have a lot of acid rain impacts in southern Vermont, and probably 3/4 of all the acid lakes in Vermont are in southern Vermont. So these are the ones that are impacted by that at this point. But we also have incredible amount of forest cover, and forest lands are our most protective of water quality. You know, that natural landscape that has a thick duff layer that infiltrates water, infiltrates and filters, and then that's what discharges into our headwater streams, which feeds the lower areas in our larger rivers. And in this particular basin, 89% of the landscape is in some form of forest cover. So that's one of the reasons we have all those green dots on the other map, because that forest cover is doing good things for our water quality. Some of the things I really wanted to focus in on in this basin are rare, threatened, and endangered species, because this basin has a significant number of those. One called the northeastern bulrush, or the barbed-bristled bulrush, only exists in pockets in this area, in wetlands, and federally endangered species. The brook floater mussel, as many freshwater mussels, is in serious decline here, and it is in the Connecticut River as well as the West River. So that's a focus, as well as the state-threatened cobblestone tiger beetle, which lives in those areas that are constantly disturbed on the river's edges. That's all cobble and sand, and not much grows there because the ice wipes it out every year. But that's their habitat, and they are state-threatened species. So this map really looks at kind of just the number, the concentration of rare, threatened, and endangered, and you can see that, you know, Herrick's Cove at the mouth of the Williams River, Retreat Meadows at the mouth of the West, and then the whole West River itself has those higher concentrations of endangered species. So we'll be focusing on that as one of the areas to cover here. And this is a really crazy map to look at, and it looks completely confusing. These are all the good waters, the ones that meet or exceed our water quality standards, which right now, most of our waters are classified as B2. And these are the ones that meet the criteria for either A1 or B1. So the greenish and the black and green dots either already meet B1 criteria, or we just need to confirm the data that it does that. And the blues are A1, which is our highest water quality rating. And then the red ones are B1 for fishing, and the Department of Fish and Wildlife sets that criteria. So they have recommended these for B1 for fishing use. The blue triangles are waters that we're proposing be studied for reclassification as Class 1 wetlands, because they have very unique and special uses and values that need to be confirmed and looked at. And then the stars are outstanding resource water recommendation. And outstanding resource water, or ORW, is a classification of protection that's different from just water quality. You can do an ORW designation for cool geology, for it being a great swimming hole, or for other historical cultural things. One of the ones that I've listed here are the petroglyphs in Bellows Falls, because they are such a unique cultural resource and deserve some form of protection. So those are the things that are listed as ORWs. So this is the list of those, and I know it's hard to see on any screen, but you might see your favorite stream or brook or pond in there. These are the ones that are being proposed for reclassification. And this is a long process. It doesn't just happen overnight. It goes public and it goes through the legislature and all that. So it takes a while, but these are ones that we are considering and looking for partners to potentially move forward. Whoops, that just skipped. There are quite a number of dams in the basin. There are 49 that we know of that are mapped dams, and there are lots and lots of dams that are not mapped that we don't know about out there. I think out of the last 5 dams we've been involved in removing, only one of them was mapped. So there are a lot of old dams in people's backyards. So we are all for removing dams because of the habitat and geomorphic, the physical enhancements that those removals cause. All the dams that we have mapped have a hazard classification. And again, it's red to green. The orange is the dam is basically breached. It's no longer really there. There might be remnants. But the hazard classification actually doesn't say anything about the condition of the dam. The hazard class means that if that dam were to fail, there would be life and property damage downstream from it. So the higher the rating, the red rating, that means there is potential for life and property damage if that dam fails. So we look at that and we want to make sure that those dams remain well maintained and safe on the landscape for everyone around them. But dam removal is a high priority because of the fish passage, the sediment movement, all those aspects of river dynamics that dams can block and cause problems with. And there are certainly other water quality problems that we have in the basin. These are all waters that are not meeting Vermont water quality standards. The yellow and the red are in that category. They don't meet water quality standards. The orange are on the border. So we know something's going on. Sometimes we know what it is that's causing the stress on the river. Sometimes we need to do more studies to figure that out. So all of these are a focus of the basin plan implementation, where we need to find and implement projects that will restore and clean up these particular reaches of river. So it is certainly a very strong priority, and we are required to address the yellows and the reds by EPA. So mostly these are, as I said, there's the acid rain issue is the blue, the 20. Flow modifications, flow and temperature, we don't necessarily think of as pollutants, but they cause all sorts of problems with rivers. So this is a flow issue, and you can imagine that we have a lot of those. We've got Ball Mountain Dam, Townsend Dam, Vernon Dam, Walpole Dam. There's a lot of large dams, and there's a couple of snowmaking pond dams. So we have a lot of that issue in this particular watershed. Other ones that are problems, certainly physical alterations and sediment are the next ones kind of on the list. So this is how those pollutants and stressors break down. what stressor we'll be looking at when we do those implementation projects. And this is the list of those waters. Again, hopefully your favorite pond or brook is not on this list. And if it is, we welcome your input and what needs to be done to help make it better again. It keeps doing that on me. What we do have in the Connecticut River Valley is the Long Island Sound TMDL, or total maximum daily load. And if you've heard anything about the problems in Lake Champlain, which if you listen to the news in Vermont, you can't help but hear about, we have the same issue on this side of the state, but it's focused on nitrogen instead of phosphorus. They're both nutrients, and it just matters where the water goes. And on that side of the state, it goes to a freshwater Lake Champlain. On this side of the state, it ultimately leads to Long Island Sound, which is saltwater. And that's why there's one response. They respond differently to the nutrients. So on this side of the state, we're concerned about nitrogen. And one of the modeling analysis that has been done, and this is based on state and EPA and USGS and whatever data is available, and this modeling is done by USGS. It looks at what the potential sources are of that nitrogen leading to the Connecticut River. And what I found interesting about this, as you can see, all the red in that center map, and the scales are different, but that's the map of septic system effluent. And the one on the left is agriculture, basically, and the one on the right is urban stormwater. So in this basin, because we don't have a lot of urban, we have a lot of forest and a lot of individual septic systems. This is what is modeled as being a source of nitrogen to the river. So we'll be looking at that, and we'll be talking with communities about what can be done to small villages that, you know, it's not an easy thing to put a wastewater treatment plant in this tiny little village. So what are the options?
$3 million.
It's an expensive proposition, but
Grafton's struggling with that right now.
is that right?
Wastewater systems, yeah.
Okay, well, there are options, and there are ways we have funding to assist municipalities with that. So we'll be hopefully reaching out to communities, and if there is interest out there, I would love to hear from communities that are interested in having that discussion. And we certainly have some restoration priorities that there are concerns about that we would like to be addressing. Crosby Brook down in Brattleboro, it's a brook that goes right through the roundabout. And that one is impaired for sediment. So we have been and will be working more in that area. The lower Saxtons and the Williams River and the middle branch of the William all have nutrient sediment concerns from the data. So we'll be looking at what we can do to address those. The West River in South Londonderry does not meet water quality standards for bacteria. And we've been trying to figure that one out for quite a long time, and we will try to narrow that down and figure out where that bacteria is coming from. Stiles Brook, which is up by the ski areas, that just has some lingering stormwater issues, but Stratton has done a lot of work on their stormwater issues over the years. And then Townsend Reservoir. There's a lot of concern about the sediment accumulation and lack of recreational uses that causes in Townsend. So we will be looking at that, and the result of that is that we will be doing a stream geomorphic assessment of the upper West River to see what projects we can be doing to address some of that sediment. And that's going to be taking place hopefully over the next year. As we go through the plan, we address the issues and the implementation projects by what we call land use sector. And those are agriculture, developed land stormwaters, certainly road issues, wastewater, and then the natural resource restoration issues and projects. So that's how they're broken down in the plan. And when you look at the agricultural piece, you don't see a whole lot of color in this map. There's plenty of ag going on in this basin, but it's not the dominant landscape. So it doesn't show up well in these kind of large scale maps. The areas that we're going to be focusing on are along the West River, up in Weston, where there's a lot of ag fields, but very few trees along those, to look at that buffer and see what we can do there. As I said, the Williams and the Saxtons have some nutrient issues that we'll be looking at. The Connecticut River has the largest farms in the region, so we'll try to work with those producers. And then Sackets Brook is a different issue. There's some bacteria, and it's looking like potentially some nutrient issues there. And there's all kinds of, there's ag uses, there's wildlife issues, there's a lot of stuff going on there. And we have yet to really determine the source of that, but we'll be trying to look into that and figure that out.
Hi, Marie. There's a question.
Go ahead, Corey.
Slide 11 on hazard dams doesn't reflect dam conditions nor relative value of dam removals. Do you have maps that do?
There is something called the Vermont Dams Task Force, and they have a map of all the dams that have been removed and potential dam removals or those that are being discussed. And if Marco makes that note, I can put a link to that on the Basin 11 webpage. Thank you. Anything else, Corey? Did I answer the question, Corey, first?
I think so. Brett, did that answer your question? Yes.
Great.
Cool. That's the only thing so far.
Okay, thank you.
There's
So-
actually a question before that. The question before was also from Brett Morrison saying, I have a question about the span of Crosby Brook that is impaired.
So Crosby Brook is impaired for sediment from the mouth up to probably just over the Dummerston line. So it comes up the Connecticut, it goes through the roundabout and then it heads north on Route 5 and then angles off west. So I believe the impaired reach is just about where the Dummerston line is. So not the upper Crosby Brook is actually in very good condition. And the south branch of Crosby Brook is in good shape. But the lower section, basically where the development is along the road and then through the Putney area, the Putney roundabout area is the impaired reach.
Yeah, so along 91 when it comes out of the woods in.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, that helps because I drive that route a lot and it always has struck me as seeming pretty sound once you start heading up into Dummerston and up the hill. Okay, so I thought it might have been the south branch, but you're saying it's not the south branch.
It's not the south branch, it's the main stem.
Got it, thanks.
So the next land use sector we look at is stormwater. This was an unfortunate site in the Brattleboro area that has been repaired, which is great. So we're looking at implementing these kind of stormwater restoration or mitigation projects. The focal areas are certainly Crosby Brook because it's sediment impaired. Ball Mountain Brook, there's a lot of stormwater issues just because there's a lot of development in the higher elevations up there. Chester, Bellows Falls, Brattleboro are the more developed communities, so we'll be working with them. We are in process now of working with Bellows Falls, Westminster, and Brattleboro on what's called stormwater master plans to look at stormwater issues and develop those mitigation restoration projects that we might put into place going forward. And the road issues, certainly, particularly our gravel road issues, are pretty significant water quality problems. Anybody who has to drive on one knows that after every storm, you're fixing your roads, which are why the new rules are in place and why these road erosion inventories, and that's all the colors on the map, are being done by every town. It's a requirement that they do this. And again, the red scale is not so good, and the green scale you're not seeing a whole lot of. All these should be done for every town. It's just all the data has not yet been uploaded into the database. So we'll be trying to get that all in there. And then working with towns on fixing those roads. I'm sure you've seen a lot of ditch work going on and rock line ditches being put on the landscape. That's all in response to this municipal roads general permit requirement that is now in play. So the state is providing significant funding for those road repairs and maintenance issues. So we'll be looking at that going forward as well. Wastewater treatment facilities, there are basically 5 in the region, 4 municipal and 1 industrial, and they have the capacity to treat 750 million gallons of wastewater a year, which is great. They are already working on nitrogen reduction because of the Long Island Sound issue. And as I said, with that modeling of septic, we'll be working with communities to try to identify those who are interested in finding options for addressing those more local wastewater issues.
Could you explain what RBC SBR?
Oh, you shouldn't ask me those. These are the technical guys. That's what it is the type of system that particular plant has for treating wastewater. And I can pop into the plan afterwards and translate those, but I know them. They're just, of course, while I'm on camera, they're not going to come to mind. And certainly the natural resource section is my favorite. The map is the rivers that we have done river assessments, geomorphic assessments on, and the condition. Again, you don't see a whole lot of green in that. There's one tiny little spot of green down in the right-hand corner on the south branch of Crosby Brook. So that tells you that's a good one. That's the only green dot on here, though. So, you know, in response to that, those geomorphic conditions certainly reflect the habitat conditions as well. So those dam removals to restore free-flowing rivers are really important. As I said, we'll be doing the SGA on the West River and looking at where else in the watershed those riparian buffers and getting the tree vegetation along the streams will help as much as possible. And, you know, these assessments help us focus on the highest priority areas where it's high or extreme sensitivity to those geomorphic changes. So we look at those and try to focus on those areas. And that's the river piece. And then we also focus on the lake piece. We have a program called LakeWise, which encourages and works with lakeshore property owners to implement best management practices to address runoff issues. So sediment and nutrients don't reach the lake. We have a greeter program, which is staffing boat launches so to check boats and prevent the spread of invasive species. So this list, you know, Gale Meadows, we could use both a greeter program and a lay monitoring program. Volunteers go out on many of our lakes and collect water samples and take readings every week or every other week all summer long. And we use that data just like we use the river monitoring data. So that's the lay monitoring program. So on these lakes, it would be great to find folks to implement those. Again, the Townsend Reservoir issue, Hapgood Pond is a entity unto itself, and we'll work with the U.S. Forest Service on that one. And there's 3 that are on that reclassification list that reach high water quality. Excuse me. Wetlands the same way. There's now a wetlands assessment program that goes on, and that's fairly new, so they haven't been a lot of coverage there, but they will be looking at that class 1 reclassification, and we're looking at what wetlands in the region might be able to be restored. Certainly Herrick's Cove and the retreat meadows have invasive issues and things like that, which could be looked at. The Sand Hill Road in Putney, which is a wonderful, great birding area, I think. And then that's got some sediment issues going on. So there's a number that we can be looking at and hopefully be able to find partners in doing some wetland restoration there as well. And the Fish and Wildlife Department puts out this piece of it, which is the fisheries and what their goals are. So the blue is wild brook trout, and the green is wild and other trout. Rainbow and brown are the other 2. So they're looking at not just how many fish are there to fish, but is the habitat good for them and for their spawning and their temperature needs and stuff like that. So looking at those riparian corridors and riparian buffers to shade the streams and keep it cool, looking at the impacts that are still on the landscape and now again after this summer of flood resiliency and sediment control and those kind of things are all important for fish habitat. So we'll be working with them on those issues. And forests, as I've already addressed, is our best land cover. So where we can restore forested floodplains, like is happening in this photograph, working with logging operations. We have what's called a skidder bridge program, which is a portable bridge that they can carry in on their trucks to cross streams without causing erosion and sedimentation. And you know, just looking at those best practices for forest management that keeps the landscape in that forest cover and allows those logging and forestry operations to happen without impacts to our water quality. I've mentioned the rare, threatened, and endangered species issues, which are also really key for climate change adaptation. One of the things about the lower Connecticut River Valley is that it is the northern end of a lot of the southern species range. So it is kind of highlighted as an important migratory route so those southern species can move north as the climate warms. So we'll be looking at those kind of issues as well, and what are those critical habitats for what's called SGCN, species of greatest conservation need.
There's a question. Actually, there are 2
Yep.
questions. Does the list of towns in the basin, are there riparian bylaws? Yes.
There is a appendix in the plan, at the end of the plan, called a municipal protections matrix, and that shows by town which ones have different protections for river corridors and floodplains and things like that. It's not so specific where it will say which town requires a 50-foot buffer on given streams, but it will tell you whether or not your town has water quality specific bylaws in place. You can also go to something called Flood Ready Vermont, and that's a website that you can put your town name in and it will pull up where your town is with those kind of regulations. So you can find it on that. It's called Flood Ready Vermont.
And then another question on slide 24. Why are fisheries wanting brown instead of brook trout, since brook is native and brown isn't, and they take the brook habitat? Question mark.
Can you repeat that again?
Yeah. Why are fisheries wanting brown instead of brook trout, since brook is native and brown isn't, and they take the brook habitat?
I will leave that to the fisheries. Brook trout are, thank you for that, are only native trout to Vermont. So when our department, DEC, looks at fisheries, they look at brook trout, and the whole community of fish, all the little ones included. Brown trout and rainbow trout are introduced species. So, but they are very important recreational fishing species. So Fish and Wildlife looks at all 3 species because they're focused on that fishing use. So please submit that question, and we have it recorded, so I will address it, but I will let the fisheries biologist respond to that because I am not the fisheries expert.
So brook trout are native for sure.
Yep.
And brown and rainbow were introduced. But if we're talking about the trout being self-sustaining and not being coming in from a fishery, that's the difference.
Yes. Yeah, both rainbow trout and brook trout do breed and spawn in Vermont and sustain their own populations. There are reaches, and on this map, they are the red reaches that are stocked. And usually those are stocked with larger trout, basically for a recreational put and take fishery to provide that recreational opportunity to people. But the brook trout are what we base our water quality data on, that and the other fish in the community. So let me get back to where I was. So this is what the table, the implementation table in the plan looks like. And these are just a few highlights to give you a sense of what's in that table. So looking at those different land use sectors, agriculture, developed lands, roads, wastewater, and some of the things that we might do. There are about 90 listed in the plan, and that's just a small piece of the projects. The major portion of the projects that we have are in what is called the Watershed Projects Database. So if you go to, so I break it down, the lakes, the wetlands, the fisheries, and all those that I've kind of mentioned earlier. We also include a section on hazard mitigation and flood resiliency because that we're still dealing with Tropical Storm Irene, and this summer hasn't helped a whole lot with that. I'll get back to the projects in a second. We have been working on these for a long time, and in the last plan, which was done in 2015, there were probably about 150 projects listed in that. Of those, 75% of those projects that we listed in that plan have been addressed in some form. They're either ongoing projects like outreach and education that are continuous, they're implementation projects that have happened, or they're projects that are in progress. We work with our partners, the Windham Regional Commission, the Mount Scottney Regional Commission, the conservation districts, all the time to implement these projects, as well as our NGO partners. So these projects are all going on, have been, and have been completed, which I think is a pretty good percentage for what goes into one of these plans. The example, couple of examples of the projects are a stream restoration project that was a post-Irene blockage that the fix. We had to fix the fix in the river. And then dam removal is dam in Weston Village blew out in Irene, and that dam now has been removed and the stream restored, just as examples of some of the types of work that we're doing. And you can find all these projects in the Vermont Clean Water Project Explorer. And if you Google that, you will find this map. You can put in Basin 11 or your town name, and it will come up with all these little droplets of different colors. And if you click on one of those droplets, it will tell you what the project is. So these are all projects that have been identified either in one of those geomorphic assessments or a stormwater plan, or the community has brought it up. one of our partners or the municipality has mentioned it, and they all get put into this database. So these are what we're trying to chip away at. And we are adding more all the time. When an issue comes up, somebody discovers a dam or a stormwater gully that needs addressing, they will all get put into this, and we work away at trying to address these.
Another question.
Yep.
Slide 27 or 28, what is the status of the wastewater projects for the 5 or 6 listed towns?
So obviously the conversation has started in Grafton. We are already working with Londonderry. The others have been brought up, and the conversation is just beginning or about to begin. So they have not been started yet. I work on them as well as our wastewater folks work on these. So I'm not sure who has already been contacted by that portion. And if there are other communities that are interested in having that conversation at this point, I am glad to add to the list. So we've done the monitoring, we've done the assessment work, I've written the draft plan, and we are here for public comment. So I'm going to show one more slide, and I open it up for your questions and comments. I'd love to hear from you. I am going to make one mea culpa that came up during our last meeting, which was last week, and that was that in what is called the existing use table at the end of the plan, it's one of the appendices, that when I cut and pasted the table from the previous plan to update it, I missed the entire West River watershed. So I missed the boating use, which is very important boating use for recreational paddlers, the West River. But I didn't just miss the West River, I missed the whole watershed. It didn't transfer over. So this table, I will need to update it, but this table will be included in the existing use table of the new plan. And that was simply an editing error. So I apologize to the paddling community. So as I said, I'm Marie Caduto. My email address is here. It is certainly the best way to reach me. Our office is currently closed for construction, so I'm not getting mail very well. So if you can email me any comments, or feel free to reach out to one of the partner organizations. If you know Margot or Corey or Chris better, you can give them, and they will pass your comments on to me. The comment period runs until September 3rd. I extended it a little bit from the public, the press release that went out, just to give people some extra time. So please, tonight, we'll record your comments here, as well as if you think of something or you have others who are interested, please pass the comments on to me through email. Thank you for listening, and I'm gonna.
Maria, I've got a question.
Sure.
You said that the assessment is completed. Did that include the Wyndham Regional Commission report on the Corps of Engineers sediment releases?
The sediment releases are addressed more in the fisheries section. That particular release was addressed probably 2 plans ago.
Multiple releases, not single.
Yeah.
And the Wyndham region did a very nice study of the ramifications. So it should be included in any assessment of the West River. And if it's not, I'd like to request right now that John Bennett add that to the assessment.
Thank you. I haven't seen that. It must be more recent than when I last looked. Yes.
But the failed septic systems, how are they identified, and how does enforcement happen?
The question is, how are failed septic systems identified and enforced? Mostly it's through, so if there is a failed septic system that surfaces, obviously a specific failed septic system has to be replaced and permitted and has to be reported to our wastewater division. And they go through that process and work with the landowners on getting those things fixed. As far as reporting, there's no, most of the time we can't necessarily identify if there's an underground discharge of bacteria because it's leaching through the soil and then coming out into the river or stream subsurface, and you can't identify where that's happening. Mostly what we're looking at is looking at, as you saw, the names of the villages. They're all villages right on the river with small communities that don't have options of putting in big wastewater treatment plants. And there is suspected discharge, but not confirmed discharge. So working with those communities, certainly, of course, on a voluntary basis, and trying to find what those village options are. It's called Village Wastewater Solutions Program. So we'll be going through that process to do an assessment, see what's there. As I said, the South Londonderry area is documented to have bacteria, and they have already taken on doing one of these planning studies. So to say we can go out and identify and point a finger, that's not how it works. We look at the water quality, and it makes us suspect that septic wastewater is a problem. And then, we can do that. And if a property owner is suspicious themselves, you can do a dye test, but that's a voluntary, homeowner interested in finding out if they're discharging.
Thank you. One other question. I've noticed that the Saxtons River has been armored all through the past couple of weeks. There have been excavators working all through Grafton and putting big boulders in and excavators down in the riverbed. And I know it's a state permitted thing, but does that send a problem downstream? What happens when you what I've read, when you armor one part of the river, then that just sends everything to the next person downstream?
That is the case. I'm just gonna take a second before I answer you and get out of this, so I can just get back to actually people seeing me and I can see you. Give me one moment. And everybody's frozen, so there we go. So hopefully people can see me now, or at least I can see other folks. Yes, the answer to that is yes. It does cause, when we put the riprap, those big boulders on the stream bank, usually it's done where there's a road or a house or something that needs to be protected. It's basically normally not allowed, like in a farm field or somebody's backyard that's 200 feet from the house, because those hard armored banks, if you think about water coming in at it and hitting that, it's hitting a hard surface. It's like a pool table. It's going to hit that and bounce off and go somewhere else. And oftentimes it goes across the river and erodes that side. And then you armor that and it goes to the next, and you just kind of chase the river downstream. They also, they last for a long time, but they don't last forever. So they erode at the front end where the rock stops, and they erode at the bottom end where the rock stops, and then it collapses. So they are very expensive, and they constantly have to be invested in and maintained. So what our the agency's goal is to get back to as close to what we call equilibrium, that stable buffered bank that holds together, that doesn't fall apart in the next storm. And if you look where there is that habitat. Here, it's more in the upper areas. We've still got a lot of water during our rain, and they didn't fall apart because they have that stable landform and those meanders that dissipate energy. So yes, those are difficult. They're essential in some locations, like right along the road, but the fewer the better.
Thank you.
Question from the chat box. Where use develops cuts or access paths to swimming or fishing areas, do you or another agency have interest in shoring up for safety and or prevent erosion? Example, the Southern Swim access point on West River north of the Steel Bridge.
Yeah, I might have that wrong. It might be south of the bridge, but I've been thinking about this since 2019 when I visited Herrick's Cove, and there was a pretty pronounced use access that just became an erosion cut there for paddlers. But then I'm pretty sure I drive by it on the West River on the southernmost sort of place where people pull off. And I feel like I've been watching their access path erode into the parking area over the last 5 years. Like it's, and I just, I thought I would hear maybe more about access on the Tactical Basin Plan, and I thought I'd hear about culverts. I don't hear about either, but the access one seems like, I'm wondering whether that's actually an area where we could have a solution that actually makes people happier, safer, and gets them out enjoying it while preventing the erosion sediment problem.
Yeah, access points certainly are, can be an erosion problem. And if it's a public access point, whether it's a public site or it's a private landowner, we have funding available to work on those sites and make those access points both safe and environmentally sound.
You do, okay.
So I'm glad to work on any of those. And if you have a specific site, please do submit that, and we can get it into that watershed projects database to be looked at for implementation. The access sites over the past 18 months have gotten a lot of use, and there have been some significant issues, both from erosion and those kind of issues, as well as overcrowding and concerns there. So they are actually a very important piece right now, and can add something into the recreation section on that. That's a very good point. And Brett, what was your other? Oh, culverts.
Yeah,
culverts.
Like 15 years ago, I heard a lot about culverts, and it seemed like that's how we were going to improve connectivity to habitat. And it seems to have fallen from favor because there are just too many of them, or what's the?
Yeah, so the culvert issue has kind of been put into the road section.
Okay.
Our clean water funding through this process has, because there are, I think the number was something like 60,000 of them that need to be addressed. That's a few. So basically that piece of it, they are just as important as they always have been. Culverts are a huge issue for sediment transport, for fish and aquatic organism migration, and for flood resilience and infrastructure protection. So they're still top priority, but we have just moved that to AOT, Agency of Transportation. They have clean water funding now to work with culverts. So it's just kind of moved from EDC to AOT.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mike had his hand raised. Mike, do you want to just unmute yourself?
Yeah, I got and follow up to the questions around the septic issue. I was wondering a couple of things. One is there is there any systematic evaluation to determine where the septic issues are coming from? you're focusing on the villages, which makes sense, but it wasn't clear to me how these determinations were even made to begin with, and if there's any kind of more detailed assessment as to how much is coming from these concentrated villages versus being more sprawled out amongst many dispersed homeowners. And so the secondary question would be, well, if that's the case, is there any ongoing discussions, maybe even beyond this basin, that have been had about how to address those individual septic systems, including incentivizing or providing aid, particularly for low-income homeowners? Or I'm also thinking about trailer parks and how their septic is addressed, and the affordability of being able to make those address those issues, because there's all kinds of other incentives for weatherization and lead paint and so forth for low-income people. I don't think I've ever heard anything specifically about addressing septic issues.
That's a great comment, Mike, because it's actually coming. ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act, is providing a significant amount of funding for exactly that. And mobile home parks are actually highlighted in that for assistance for both water and wastewater. So there's going to be a push to work with those communities. I've already reached out to 2 that could use that service. So it's a great point, and a lot of us are really happy to see that funding coming in, because there hasn't been a lot of assistance for that. As far as the data goes and where those maps came from, as I said, USGS took all the available data that they have, both from themselves, from EPA, from the states, and used that, put it into their modeling system. And the modeling is called SPARROW, SPARROW. And it's available online. You can look it up and you can play with the model and put in locations, and they're called HUC 12s, basically small watersheds and catchment basins, and look at what the numbers are. And it's modeling. We know it's not ground truth. We don't know exactly where all this is actually happening, but it's the best model that we've got to work with. So if you're interested, you can look at that. And as I said, it's just called SPARROW, USGS SPARROW modeling.
Yeah, because looking at the maps, particularly looking at, say, there was a lot of the red in that area and rural parts of Westminster and Putney and Rockingham that are not in the village areas. And so it seemed like if that's actually accurate, then there needs to be some more thought about it, getting at the individual homeowners and not just on a stick level, but on a carrot basis, potentially. And one of the things you didn't address was beyond the trailer parks, is there any funding for individual homeowners, particularly low-income homeowners?
The state has a low-interest loan program for private septic. It has to be a failed system. And again, that's not my department. So the program is out there and it is available, and I can get that information, or at least provide a link to that in a follow-up. If you could write that down, Margot, I would provide that. Thank you. And as far as those red and yellow areas being in rural areas, the data also considers the soil type, the slope, the soil type, the treatment, the underground treatment that can happen naturally through the soil systems. So I know that data is incorporated into the model.
Thanks.
Marie, there was a question from John Bennett. He said he couldn't hear the person who asked about sediment releases, and suspects he may have been referring to the Corps of Engineers report about low mountain sediment releases, continued accumulation. Wants to know if he's still there, because he'd be glad to try to respond if he could restate the question so he could hear it.
That was the question. Did the basin plan take that report into account? And I have not. I did not see that report. So I would be glad to, again, I would be glad to look at it and incorporate what is appropriate, and also link to it on the Basin Plan page. If John, you could provide me with that link.
I'll be happy to. That's the Corps of Engineers report from quite a long time ago that said there's 400,000 cubic yards of sediment accumulated behind Ball Mountain Dam, and we can't find any place to put it. So anyway, I'll be sure to provide.
So they deposited it into the Townsend Reservoir.
I'll be glad to provide a link to it. I mean, I've got a PDF of it somewhere. I'll try to find that and dig it up. There is
Or
a
just
hard
send-
copy in the
Yeah,
office.
you can send me the PDF, and I can post it. Either way is fine.
There were two very, very large releases, and I think there was an additional one that wasn't covered in that report.
Okay. So there are 3 known releases, and some are covered in that report, and
Two
some are.
positive.
2 are, and 1 likely is not. Any other comments, concerns? What did I miss? What did I get? Yes.
The knotweed infestation is the most dramatic change in
Yeah.
habitat that I've seen here since I've been here. And does that fall within your purview at all?
So the question is whether knotweed falls within my purview. I certainly work with a lot of organizations and volunteers to work on that issue. Knotweed is a really significant problem in this basin. I mean, Saxtons River is like, yeah, it's insane. It's like ground zero for knotweed around here. And there are a lot of other areas pretty close. Knotweed is a huge challenge because it grows through and in anything, and it grows 6 inches a day. There are treatment methods, mechanical treatment methods that, pulling, or now it's using that fine little square metal netting, or kind of fencing with the little half-inch squares. Hardware cloth, thank you. And if you have a patch that's small enough to put that down, it grows and it cuts itself off because it goes through the mesh, and so that's the latest.
And add a little to that, Marie. The very latest is to have it up about 4 or 5 inches from the ground level. So it's not right at ground level anymore, nor is it 2 inches below. So,
Okay,
right.
thank you. Evolving information as we speak. But it's hard. There are the West River watershed, the Southeastern Vermont Watershed Alliance is trying to get some grant funding to do some work there on it. It's a challenge. The agency keeps saying they will assist with funding, but they have yet to come through with that. They're focused more on the aquatic, the milfoil and the water chestnut and things like that. So we keep trying.
Thank you.
And if you can, please do report those communities, especially if it's a new one and it's a small one. You can either do it on Vermont Invasives or iNaturalist. Both have sections for reporting invasives. And if it's a small new population, you have an opportunity, you have a chance of stopping that spread. But once it's gotten Saxtons River scale, it's very difficult. And it's crazy, but one of the impacts, you think about all the ecological connections, and it's a terrible buffer plant because it's got thick roots. Everything dies back, so there's no vegetated cover, no stems or anything in winter or ice out. The roots are big, thick things, so they don't form a mesh that holds the soil together, which is why you want buffer plantings. And then when it grows, it's not a native plant, so all the bugs that eat holes in plants don't feed on it, right? So all those bugs in that buffer eat the leaves and drop into the water and are food for fish. So studies have found that the fish in areas that are covered with knotweed are smaller because they don't have that food source. So you think about all the ecological connections of invasive plants, and it's kind of mind-boggling. So the more we can stop those smaller populations when they start and get rid of those, that's one of the things we can do.
I'm pretty sure you should put hardware cloth over the town of Newfane. They must have very small fish.
That's great. Well, if you come up with other questions or comments or things you would like me to look at, please do email me, marie.caduto@vermont.gov. Or again, contact one of the partner organizations and they will pass your comments on to me. If there's nothing else, thank you very much. Oh, wait.
Cheryl Joy Lipton has a question.
Yes.
I do want to ask one question. Will this also include direct, suggestions for buffers and widths of the riparian buffers? And will it perhaps be even more than suggestions?
We cannot mandate. We do not. We have buffer laws for pretty much everything but rivers. We have them for lakes and wetlands, and we do not have them for rivers. There is a group that is working towards that, and it has been proposed to the legislature on numerous occasions. Some of us hold out hope, but that it is local zoning at this point that covers buffers. We do have the river corridor protections, which kind of says smaller streams 25 feet and larger ones 50 or 100, but that is strictly for getting a permit. That's not general coverage. So work with your local town planning department on those regulations and your town plans. Those do make a difference. And if it comes to it, we may at some point have a requirement on that, but we do not know.
Will this have a suggestion then, rather than a requirement? Will at least have it include suggestion, or is this only requirements that you're talking about?
No, we're looking to put buffers anywhere and everywhere anyone wants to have them put in.
And there are best management.
There are best management practices for agriculture and for forestry on buffers. But again, there is no, I talk about buffers quite a lot and looking at where they can go. I do have a few areas that are highlighted, like that upper West River, where it's all ag fields and there are no trees at all. So I do highlight some of those locations that I'd like to focus on, but you can kind of look just about anywhere and find where they are needed. So when the state puts funding into assisting with buffer plantings, we require a minimum of 35 feet because that's kind of the smallest width of a buffer that is going to do some decent water quality protection. Act 250, you're supposed to have a 100-foot buffer that can go down to 50 feet depending on the situation. But anything under Act 250 jurisdiction requires buffers. But those are the only areas that we have jurisdiction.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you for attending. I appreciate your input, and please send me any more that you come up with.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marie.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.